Tonight, I just want to do a brief overview on property tax because really, it's the most complicated part of the budget, especially when it comes to revenues. So, just some property tax basics. Some of the terminology used, and I'm not going to go through and read all of this because I'm going to give you examples, which will probably be more understandable anyway. But you have assessed property value, which is really the market value, what you could sell your house for, times 11.5%. The mill rate, this is the rate that your taxing jurisdictions set to charge your property tax. The current mill for Merriam right now is 27.665. Property tax revenue obviously is the amount that the city then stands to collect. And the revenue neutral rate is the tax rate for this year, the current year, that would generate the same amount of property tax that we generated last year. But since the assessed valuation is changed, that rate has to be modified. That is a big, long, complicated sentence, and I promise when we get to the example, it will make more sense. Okay, so having gone through that, how are your property taxes collected? The average market value of a house in Merriam is $255,000. So to get to your assessed property value, you'd multiply that times 11.5% to get an assessed property value of just under $30,000. As I said before, our current mill rate is 27.665. So to see what's going to show up on your property tax bill, you take the 29,325 times our mill rate, you divide that by 1,000, and you would get $811 would be the average property tax just for the city of Merriam. And per month, that would be $67.61 would be your property tax to us to provide all the services that the city provides. How does that rate compare to other Johnson County cities? You can see we're nearing the mid-mark, but we're on the bottom end of that at 27.665. Okay, so we said that we have 27.665 mills. How much revenue is generated by each mill? So I think this kind of answers the question, what if we raised or lowered our mill rate by 1 mill? How much of a difference would it make? And it's $225,000. So if you raised it, you'd generate that much more. If you lowered it, it would reduce property tax by that much. What is our total mill rate? Because obviously you're not just paying property tax to the city, you're paying it to the school district, the county, the state. Our total is 115.510, which really puts us on the bottom end or the lower end of, I guess it's the top on this, but it's really the lower range of Johnson County cities. And then who gets your property tax? 45% of it goes to the Shawnee Mission School District, 8% the college, 22% Johnson County, and then the Merriam gets right at a quarter at 24%. Okay. As of February 13th, our assessed property value was split 52% commercial, residential 48%. On this next slide, it kind of shows how that compared to the previous year. And so residential previously had been just under 101 million, so we saw a 13% increase. And commercial had been around 118 million, and that was a 4.6%. And so in total, assessed valuation went up 8.6% this year. Okay, now going back to this revenue neutral rate, the revenue neutral rate, as I said, is defined as the tax rate for the current year that would generate the same property tax revenue as levied the previous tax year using the current tax year's total assessed valuation. It doesn't allow for any growth due to inflation, and it doesn't allow for any growth from new construction. So if your assessed valuation went up because you built something, you don't get to capture that extra property tax.
So for example, that would mean, sorry to interrupt, Reed built a new dealership last year. This is not built into the system that we would capture any of the additional growth of property tax that his dealership brought into the city.
Correct, correct. They would get billed, but the overall levy, mill levy, would have to go down. So looking at this example, and these are not the actual numbers yet. In fact, I just pulled this slide from last year. And when we get the numbers, we'll bring them to you. But the way that works is if the previous assessed valuation had been total of $214 million, or last year it was, and we levied, at the time it was going to be 27.558. It gets adjusted throughout the year. The total property tax levy was 5.905. So the county told us, since we had $226 million in assessed valuation last year, that the revenue neutral rate was 26 mils, which got us within a couple $100, the very same amount of property taxes. What this then effectively does is it says you can't generate any more revenue than you did last year, even as, like with the Reed dealership, that new construction, or the fact that inflation's happened. So unless you're going to keep it, unless you're essentially going to lower your mill rate, you have to pass an ordinance saying we want to exceed our revenue neutral rate, which kind of implies that you're raising property tax when really you're just trying to keep the rate at the same, or you might even lower it from that 27.558. But unless you lower it down to 26.090, you have to say you're exceeding that rate. And so that isn't necessarily a really intuitive thought process. And so just so that the first time you go through this process, I didn't want it to be the night that you're deciding whether you want to exceed the revenue neutral rate. So what happens with all this information as we're going forward? Well, on June 15th, the county will notify us of what that revenue neutral rate is. On June 27th, we will be bringing the revenue projections to you, and that will include the calculation that I just showed you. So you'll be able to see, okay, if we're going to exceed the mill rate, it would generate this much more income, but if you don't want to, the mill rate's going down, et cetera. July 11th, we will bring the draft budget review. This will be the whole budget, what's in it. We'll talk to you about that. And on that night, we will need a determination of whether or not we're going to exceed the revenue rate or if we're going to stay at the revenue neutral rate. It's not on here, but by July 20th, the city has to notify the county as to whether or not we are considering raising it, if we're going, or exceeding it. If we elect not to exceed it, then we'll have our final resolution and budget meeting on August 8th. We'll certify it to the county by August 25th. If we elect to exceed it, then it kind of extends it out a little bit more, and we'll have a public hearing talking about exceeding it and adopting the budget, and we'll get it all wrapped up around August 30th. So are there any questions about this? procedure.
If I could
Yes.
just add to the process, I'm sorry, real quick. This will also be the first year since the passage of the legislation for SB 13 that there will be an actual postcard. We do not know exactly what will be on the postcard. We would imagine it'll be the same information that you get with your property tax bill. It comes out at the end of the year. It's green and it has all the different lines. This is what you paid all these entities in 20. This is what we're asking for you to pay in 21. So we think it'll be very similar information to that, but we don't exactly know what it's going to look like. So, but this will be the first year that people will get a postcard that says that the city or the county or the school district or anyone is considering exceeding the revenue neutral rate. So just as an aside, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Mr. Silvers, go ahead.
If we determine that we're going to exceed the rate, do we know, I assume there's a penalty to the county for that. Do we know what that is?
I'm sorry, a penalty?
Is there a fine that we have to pay to the
No.
county?
No,
No, okay.
no. Really, this is just a mechanism so that you're telling people, hey, we're going to generate more in property tax this year, and then it's having a public hearing where members of the public could come and express their glee that you're exceeding it or their displeasure.
Mr. Caldwell.
That's the same process we went through last
Yes,
year.
it
We
is.
did, and we had the meeting and nobody came and,
This is
Yeah.
the exact same process. Just wanted to,
okay. Question back to Mr. Engel. Will the residents get one postcard for each entity?
That is my
Or one postcard in total?
I think they will get one in total. Is that your understanding?
that is correct. The
And it'll
county's-
list
That's why
out-
we all have, everyone has to tell the county clerk by whatever the
Okay.
deadline is up there so that they can just send one postcard. That's my understanding.
So
Again,
we might get someone come to the meeting this year.
we could get someone that comes to the meeting and says that my taxes are going up, and it may not even be us. It could be somebody else, and they're just don't know what the postcard is telling them. So the idea behind it, just as kind of an idea of why the legislation changed, is that, for example, in our city, we have not voted to raise the mill rate in over a decade. We have kept the mill rate. 10 years ago, it was 27 something something. It's 27 something something now. We clearly, because the value of property has went up, we are bringing in more money now than we were 10 years ago on many of the same properties. We have some new properties since then, but if you had a property in Merriam 10 years ago, you would have been paying less for the same mill rate as you would be now because your property likely is worth more. Well, that is for some folks, I think there's the concern that, we're saying we're not raising taxes. And people are looking at their tax bill and going, well, you're not raising taxes, I'm paying more in taxes. So I think the concern was there was a disconnect. So that's why they created the, not the salary cap, that's sports. The what? Right, before that. The tax lid. Yeah, so we lived under the tax lid for 5 or 6 years, but they put so many exemptions into the tax lid that effectively we didn't have to do anything different than we were doing before the tax lid. This was I think the latest and greatest version of how do we make elected officials say we are raising your taxes, or at least a message that is a little bit clearer that we are raising your taxes. We don't care what you call it, you are raising taxes. But again, I think the bad thing about this is that it does not capture any new growth. So if you are an Overland Park, a Shawnee, a Lenexa, a Olathe, and part of your business plan is growth and expansion, every year that you have new neighborhoods and everything else, either all the existing neighborhoods effectively are paying for the growth, or you have to raise taxes, even though it's just new residents or new businesses that are paying for it. So it's not a great system. I suspect it won't last for a long time, but it is the system that we have now.
I think one other thing to point out as well is that we actually could reduce our mill rate and actually collect less money, but if the school district, the state, and the county all raise theirs, when somebody receives that notice or they receive their tax bill, it could definitely be more. We as the city always get the blame. You raised my taxes. So it may not even be us.
Depending on how clear that postcard is, we
and
don't.
people will look at the bottom line as my taxes higher or lower. And we are less, what, 24% is what that whole tax bill is what we, as a city, actually receive, so.
I think another thing to add to that, apologize, but is that, we've got the mill, if we don't know what the revenue neutral rate is, but our current mill rate is 27,664. It's quite possible we could roll the mill back 1 mill, and we had enough growth in the community that we're actually lowering our mill rate by 1 mill, but because it doesn't go all the way down to the revenue neutral rate, we still are going to have to say, or at least there's going to be postcards that go out that say, we're still raising your taxes, because they will pay a penny more than they paid last year.
We're not raising their taxes, we're collecting more taxes.
We're collecting, yeah.
There you go. Mr. Caudill, go ahead.
That slide you had before showed that residential real estate is up 13%. So yeah, that would be, if we don't change the mill rate, that's a 13% increase in taxes collected. So.
For the city.
For
Of
residential.
the quarter of overall tax bill.
Right, but if everybody didn't, it would come out to be 13, so, I think as we're putting together our budget, I doubt we'll be revenue neutral, but I hope we're not at 13%. I hope we're able to reduce the mill levy.
We'll take a look.
Are there any other questions? Okay.
Yeah, I
Ms.
would,
Ryder.
why is the commercial rate so much lower than the residential growth rate?
It's all based on market value. And I think if you think about it over the last 2 years, 3 years, home sales have gone crazy and property values have skyrocketed. And so that's a reflection of that. The commercial is based more on like how much they can charge per square foot and the value of the business, and it's a little more convoluted. And so they're both based on, I guess you could say, market value, but the value of businesses don't necessarily correlate to the value and growth in homes. Right.
I have one question that's just purely informational. What if the assessed value for a city goes down and you have to raise the mill levy to stay revenue neutral? What's that look like?
Then, right, and you would not have to pass anything saying, so you could essentially raise the mill levy and not have to exceed your revenue neutral rate in that case,
All right,
which
I
is
was
kind of quirky.
Yeah, I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Neal, did you have a question you needed to ask? Okay. Mr. Neal, are you with us?
Yeah, I am. Barely hear things, so
Okay, we were just inquiring, do you have any questions for Director Oliver?
well, my usual question, how much of the commercial property tax value, it resides within the I-35 TIF district versus outside of the TIF?
Okay, did you understand the question?
I
as to-
did, and I would have to, it's around, I would have, let me look that up and I will get back with you on that.
Yeah, Mr. Neal, did you hear? She will get back with us on that number.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. Seeing no other questions, I thank you for bringing that to us. Do you have anything else to add?
No, that's all of it.
That's it?
So,
Okay, all right, thank you. All right. Well, I did, we don't need a motion or anything. We're just going to adjourn the meeting here. Here, let me, okay, thank you for everyone that stayed. Okay.